Lovely sunny day today, enjoyed from the comfort of your own home. So I thought I'd do a video today on the top 5 ways to maximise the profit in your business. Critical point, making a profit. Easy said, very difficultly done. So I thought I'd give you a top 5 on, from my experience in the businesses I've been and the ones that we've run successfully and have turned big profits, what have been the key things that we've done to drive profit. Number 1, put people first. Put the culture, assuming you have staff, even if it's just one, put culture at the heart of what you do. Happy workforce generally equates to a greater yield of work and therefore more profit. Give autonomy, but within a framework. Challenge and attack poor performance and poor behaviour. I've said it in other videos, if there are kind of cultural terrorists, mood vacuums, rip them out of that business as quick as you can. But reward the good people. Champion other people's ideas, not just your own, and really make them part of the company, the vision and the direction. Because when you have a happy, engaged workforce, and in a time like coronavirus, you see things going out there, be it on LinkedIn or the news, of all the fantastic things that some of these new startups have done that have turned into big businesses at quite breakneck speed. The culture really defines that business. As you look at that business, you can tell what it would be like to work there. And there's a buzz and there's an engagement and there's a joy. And that goes all the way through to actually, as a customer, you feel part of that journey. So I think that's point number 1, and it's something that's really easy to forget as an entrepreneur, as a business person. You're so focused on your day-to-day, what has got to get done, that actually, as you grow, as you scale, your people are everything. They'll define what your product is. They'll define what your customer journey looks like. They'll define what the atmosphere is like on a day-to-day basis, because as a leader, you can influence all those things. You can set the tone, you can create the direction, but you can't do it all yourself. That is one of the big points that I'd advocate, is to put staff first. And in every single company that I've had or that I've managed, if I look back to my days with Compass Group, where I was a troubleshooter, or I certainly went to the most challenging sites where we grew profit 2, 3, 4, 5-fold. It was when we harnessed an exceptionally talented group of people that genuinely enjoyed what they were doing, and we were all working towards a common goal, and they felt part of it. There was an open door policy. We'd champion their ideas as much as someone who was more senior, and we really put the people at the heart of everything we did. So that's it. Number 1, put the people first. So number 2, after putting your people first, make sure your customer is at the heart of everything you do. And if you put your people first, they'll share that value, because plumber, builder, serial entrepreneur, business executive, team leader, supervisor, manager, there isn't one of those jobs that doesn't correlate back to putting the consumer first. Even if you're an NHS worker at this moment in time, where it's become so relevant to us all, at the heart of what they do, their consumer, their customer is us, the general public, and they make us better back in our houses and living our life as best we can in this moment in time. But the customer is at the heart of what they do. Ultimately, in times like this, it's not just about, it's easy to lose sight that it's keeping people alive. It's more than that. It's keeping them healthy and able to enjoy their day-to-day life. So that's a good example where you wouldn't necessarily think they've put the customer first, but the customer is at the heart of everything they do. As I said, if you're an electrician, if you're a teacher, making sure your kids are getting the best education they can and you really are impacting their lives, all the way up to somebody who makes pyjamas for a living. It's a product and it will go to the consumer, and you want to make sure that that product is durable, lasts, doesn't fade. It's all the things that you want as a consumer to purchase. And I think any business that becomes so lost in its own process, its own need for daily meetings, phone calls, email exchanges, you can become so consumed by all of the processes and all the things that you've put in place that you lose sight of, quite simply, you go from A to B. You've created a product or a service and you sell it. And there is a huge journey, and I'm not underestimating that journey, but actually you have to remain focused on where did you start and where are you trying to get to, because you can get so consumed by the journey that actually you start to compromise either the initial vision or the quality of your end product. So put the consumer at the heart of everything you do. Number 3 is more subtle. It's look for efficiencies in everything that you do. So if you're a manufacturing company, or if you're a design company, or if you're a services business, look for the efficiencies. If that's time, or if that's money, if that is material, there is always a better way. And that doesn't mean that you have to be like these huge corporations where you've got efficiency managers, project managers, and there's a spreadsheet and a progress chart for everything. Efficiencies can be found in the simplest of ways. And a really powerful example I have of this was when I was working in Compass Group many years ago. I got an email, and I was running one of the stadiums, saying that we were all being asked to move to the purchase of certain canned tomatoes.
A lot of fun. We had a time of our life. We enjoyed it a lot. And as you can see, I'm enjoying that.
It sounds hugely insignificant, but when I give you the value, it's not. So if everybody in the country, because of the scale that the business had, started ordering one of the following three cans, rather than, I think there was 27 in circulation, it would add to the bottom line of the business 6 figures, but big 6 figures as well, not small. So it was canned tomatoes and another canned product. And you look at that and you can go, or you could look at it the other way and go, when times are hard, that is the equivalent of an entire workforce remaining in work. So it's finding those efficiencies wherever you can. If I bring it back to something that's super relevant today for me, chairman of the world's largest Lego model building company, the efficiencies that had to be found were in monitoring how long it took to make a model. So if you made an elephant, but you made it once, how long did it take? If you made it twice, how long did it take? If you made it 3 times? And every time it gets quicker because you learn. And then you realise if you can actually start to build them in a row, which I know sounds odd, that might sound obvious, but when you're making models, you're making them to order. You're not bulk quantity smashing them out. But actually, if we could make sure that we back-to-back certain tours or trails that we were making, and there was commonality in the internal structure, the steel, or the colour palette of the bricks, actually that delivered huge efficiencies. And when you've only got 52 weeks in the year to build as many models as possible, being able to make an elephant, a giraffe or a tiger quicker by a week each time actually yields you so much more from the workforce, and means that you can either give pay rises or recruit more staff, or bonuses are possible, or when times are hard, which they are right now, actually the cuts that you have to make aren't as deep, because you've always been aware and cognizant of the fact that just because things might be going well, you don't need to not check on the pennies, because the famous phrase, if you watch the pennies, the pounds will look after themselves. If you have a real laser focus on the detail, actually what you find is that triggers a set of behaviours that makes that, again, part of what we talked about at the beginning, the positive culture. Because making efficiencies is not always seen as a negative. If you let things escalate to the point where you have to make big, deep cuts, that is where it has a negative effect. Whereas actually, if you're conscious of making efficiencies, that doesn't have to feel like death by 1,000 cuts. It's just a way of working. It's if you can find paper cheaper from this supplier, why wouldn't you? If changing the electricity bill from one company to the other saves you £200 or £300 a year, why wouldn't you? These are all things that businesses overlook when you start to scale up, but actually if you can make those part of your practices as early as possible, it's amazing how quickly the small things start to add up to big things, meaning you don't have to then make the big changes, which can at times feel demonstrative. So that is number 3, make sure you take the efficiencies where you can. Number 4, this one is particularly relevant as you scale big. And when I say big, that doesn't mean that you have to be in tens of millions. But anyone watching this, if you've been part of a company that goes through uber growth, make sure you have what I call that kind of stop, check, how are we doing MOT moment. And that can be monthly, particularly when things are going quickly, but certainly quarterly. Never let a quarter go by without reviewing what is happening in the business, because as you scale up, if I take you back to when I was a company called Multiplay, which was owned by Game Digital, and I was running the esports and events department, after acquisition, that company went from, I don't know, maybe having 20 staff to 100 staff, all in the space of 6 months. And because you're going at such speed, by the time I turned up, the 100 staff were in place, essentially. I maybe recruited the last 10 or 15%. But what that taught me was that you've come in, you've been given a plan that you're working to, and you go for it. That taught me was that review period's critical, because we started to see the growth from the investment, but actually the growth wasn't coming in the areas that we necessarily expected it to be. All the best laid plans and all that. But actually what that taught me, and it's something I've done in other businesses as well, was that every business, even if you're a lone worker, you will still at some point review your accounts, because you've got an accountant and you have to. At those points, make them as regular as possible. Monthly ideally, but quarterly is probably the most sensible, because you actually want to have a day where you on your own, or you with your staff, take that moment to stop, check, and where are we? Because as you grow, and you grow quickly, and you grow aggressively, you start to turn on many, many, many engines, and all the cylinders are firing.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0, and liftoff.
But what you'll find is that of the 5 things you've turned on, 2 are having real critical success. But because you're so focused on the growth, you can just keep all the jet engines firing. Whereas what you need to do is turn down those 3 that aren't working and really ramp up the 2 that are, and laser focus in on the parts that are successful. And the reason why I say that's uber critical is because if you take those 5 jet cylinders, even if you think that they were being powered by fuel, how much more efficient is it that you're powering 2 engines rather than 5, particularly when the 2 engines are actually the one that's generating the most power for you at that moment in time.
That is awesome.
And I think a lot of businesses lose sight of that when you're growing and when things feel good, you just keep going. You don't stop, you don't do your MOT, you don't do the health check on what are we doing that's working and what are we doing that's not, because when things are going well, it's very easy to get caught up in the hyperbole that everything we're doing is great, whatever we touch is going to turn to gold. That's not true. You will have turned on many channels or applied many different focuses, even if they're not part of the strategy, which is another video I've posted about. One strategy can lead to a strand of 10 or 15 actions. In every single business I've never encountered, even in the most successful ones, every policy, every objective, every action you take is not always effective. And if you can be cognizant enough as leaders to stop and have that moment, even if it's just for a couple of hours in your meetings. What have we been doing that's not worked? Just turn those things off, because they're efficient for time. The staff that are working on those projects will not become demotivated or demoralised when they see the growth going on over there while they're plugging away on something that's not working. But the big one, because we're talking about profit, is you spend less money, and you spend your money on the activity that drives the best pound for pound outcome for yourself, and that it's something that you just don't take the time to do. When you're successful, you also then, when you're not successful, the opposite is you're trying to hack. Every company knows what it looks like to go through the tough times. And actually, if part of your day-to-day practices were stop, health check, what are we doing, what's working, what isn't, and you turn off the things that you won't work. I said it earlier in the video, when you do have to make cuts, because businesses always do, even the best businesses. I read a great book by Netflix, and obviously it's one of the biggest companies in the world right now, but they had to make some really severe cuts in the first 3 or 4 years, because as you start to recognise what you're good at and what you're not, you pivot and you change direction slightly, your strategy is adjusted, you make those cuts. And if you're cognizant along the way, you're making those changes as you go. So that's point number 4, hopefully. Point number 5 is a big one. It's probably the biggest one, and it's the one that I've seen so many companies be guilty of. And when I've gone into companies and I suppose had my biggest impact, this has been the first thing that I've addressed. Put the numbers front and centre for everybody to see. I would always advocate complete and utter transparency with your staff. That's not always been the case in all the businesses that I've been in. It's not always been the case in the businesses that I've been leaders in, because I might be the leader, but I'm not the ultimate leader in some of the companies earlier in my career. And there is company protocol. But where you have the most impact, and where I was given the rein in later years in the companies and subsequently future jobs, is you want to educate the staff on the profit and loss. What do we do, and what does it generate, and how much does it cost in order to do that? Because it's so easy for a member of staff to turn up and think that my day starts at 8:30, it finishes at 5:30, and on the last day of the month I'm going to get paid. What they don't understand is that the decisions they make in the 30 odd days of that month might determine, particularly in the smaller businesses, whether they actually do get paid or not at the end of the month. Because it's very easy, talking about being self-employed as we have in other videos, you know what that feeling's like to make sure that people do get paid at the end of the month. But if you're an employee, and not everyone's like this, I'm not saying that, but you can, particularly in the larger companies, take for granted that you are going to get paid. Putting the numbers at the front and centre of everything you do, even if they're sanitised, headline revenue, what gross profits are, and what does that kind of drop out at the bottom without all the pieces in the middle. It's a huge education. So one of the things I've always tried to advocate is that everyone understands the costing of the product. So if you're in the sales team, when you sell, this is something that I put in at Live Company for the sales team that sell the trails, they need to know what the margin is that they're selling the trail for. Even though they're driven by a turnover, actually underneath it all, if that trail drops below a certain margin, there's then a delegated authority approval list where it works its way up the hierarchy if someone really wants to get that sale, but it's not at the margins we would ordinarily retrieve. So when I talk back to culture, you've given them autonomy, they don't need to come to you on day-to-day decisions, but there is then a boundary which, when you step beyond, there's then someone that can approve that. It works quickly, it works efficiently, but it's putting the numbers at the heart of everything you do. If you are an executive and you have a senior team, it doesn't have to cascade as far as everybody down to the floor. I'm fairly liberal, so I personally don't really have a huge problem with everyone in the company understanding numbers, just a personal preference. But as an absolute minimum standard in any businesses I've been in, if you have been a direct report of mine, and if you are a direct report of someone who is a direct report of mine, you will see the monthly numbers. What have we done? How have we done it? And as I say, in the companies that I've been in where that's not been the case, I've found that a challenging environment to be in, because as a decision maker, the easiest way to justify your decisions If they're not strategic, they're financial. But if you've, famous phrase, treated your staff like mushrooms, kept in the dark and fed on shit, that's what that means.
Please hang up and try again.
How are they going to understand your decision making? And as a leader, I think whilst people will respect you and buy into your vision, you still need to be able to go home at night or when you get in the car and understand why your leader has made the decision they have. And I think putting the numbers at the front and centre of everything you do is the best way of doing that. Because as far as I'm concerned, what's the risk? They turn up to work to get paid, and to get paid the company needs to make a profit. Some people turn up to work for different reasons. They might love the product, they might be passionate about what you offer, it might even be a charity. But none of that matters if you're not making a profit. Because again, as we talked about the other things about maximising your profit, you turn off the cylinders that aren't firing and just focus on the ones that are. But the best way to do all of the things that I've talked about, points 1, 2, 3 and 4, is to share with your staff. Again, it goes to the culture, but it's putting the numbers at the front and centre of everything you do. If profit is what you are in it for, why do something that doesn't make a profit? There are exceptions. I've done on a number of occasions. I have broken my own rule and justified it to the staff to go, this project is of such strategic importance that it's not about the margin. That one win will trigger 10 others that are all margin bearing. But because you've been transparent, the staff understand that and they don't see it as someone who's not practicing what they preach. They get the rationale, and a lot of time they go, do you know what, that's super smart, let's do this, I'm with you, let's actually do it. But on a day-to-day basis, when they're ordering ink, when they're topping up the toilet roll, if they know that putting the numbers first means that, oh, this toilet roll looks expensive today and I only paid half that last week, just because it's not their money, they value it. They actually put a value on it like they would were it their own money. And I think the only way to create that behaviour is to put the number at the heart and at the front of everything you do with your people, and be totally transparent, because when you win together, and when you lose together. Albeit you might lose to a greater or lesser degree, but you also win to a greater or lesser degree. But the best teams share, they trust, and they believe in what you're doing. And I think any business that chooses to shroud the numbers in mystery has it wrong. That is my pure belief. So that would be my final piece of advice for you all if you want to maximise your profit. Start to talk about your numbers. You can obviously sanitise them if you don't think it's appropriate for it to run throughout the business. But very rarely have I seen an occasion where it is not fit for somebody to see. You don't need to burden them with the pressure of what those numbers mean, but the numbers are the numbers. So you sure as hell might as well share them, because that will explain a lot of the things that you'll be trying to explain on a day-to-day basis, and it will help them understand why you want them to care about things that may appear to them to be insignificant. So hopefully that's helpful. Hopefully some of the other videos I've been posting, top fives, hints, tips, whether it's recruitment or succession planning, are useful. Hopefully you'll like, subscribe. I keep asking for it. Please engage, please comment, please be part of the content. But as always, hopefully not forever, but for now, stay safe. I mean, you'll always need to stay safe, let's be honest. But wash your hands, socially distance, and don't be a dickhead. Stay in your house, you're not above the law. So best of luck to you all, be safe, and I'll see you in the next one.